Will you join me in a word of prayer? O Lord, open thou our hearts to hear through thy word to us draw near. Let us thy word heirs retain. Let us thy children and heirs remain. Luke 2:22, where our gospel lesson began for today, is the continuing baby book of Jesus. In it, there's snapshots and pictures, memories of Jesus' early days and his early life. And so it starts off in the first few pages with the announcement that he was to be born. And then we see snapshots of the night of his birth. Well, there's images in there of an angel meeting with Mary. And then with angels filling the Bethlehem sky. Oh, and there's pictures of those shepherds as they came that night to greet him. And there's the child, wrapped in swaddling cloths and lying in the manger. There's Mary, contemplating these things, treasuring them up in her heart. In Luke 2:20, the shepherds are leaving, and they're rejoicing and praising God for everything they've seen and heard, and they're telling it to everyone who would hear. And then there's Luke 2:21. That's 8 days later. The child's just over a week old already. And he's being circumcised and given the name Jesus. And then Luke 2:22. That's where our gospel lesson picks up for today. In Jesus' baby book. Luke 2:22. Now the child's just over a month old. It's been 40 days. And the child's being taken by Mary and Joseph to the temple in Jerusalem in order to perform the ritual purification from Leviticus chapter 12 and the rite of redemption of the firstborn from Exodus chapter 13. It's the next entry in Jesus' baby book. Okay, this isn't Jesus' baby book. This is for my firstborn. Both of these are the baby books for my kids. My wife, Jennifer, treasured these things, pondering them in her hearts. And not only that, but put them together with pictures and colored paper and all kinds of words and thoughts and notes. And in fact, in here is even every list of what she received at every baby shower in anticipation of our firstborn's birth. And on this list were all sorts of things. There's the baby bathtub, the one that fits in the sink, and the Johnson & Johnson baby soap to go with it, because you can't just use regular baby soap for the baby. And then there's bibs and blankets and that little monitor that you put in the baby's room so that when they're sleeping you can hear them from the other room. And there's the bouncy seat and all kinds of toys that squish and squeak, all kinds of fuzzy things for the children that Mary and Joseph likely could not have afforded for their little one when he was born. Because there is something that every good Jewish family would have to prepare for the birth of their first son, a lamb. And not a plush one, not a stuffed one, not one that the child would play with when it got older. It's a real lamb. Every good Jewish family needed one because it was required for the sacrifice when the child was 40 days old. That's the entry in Jesus' baby book that's happening in Luke chapter 2, verse 22 and following. In verse 23, they're there to present this to the Lord. It's because the Lord required it in our Old Testament lesson, Exodus chapter 13. It was printed there for you. The Lord said, every firstborn child is mine. It was because of what happened in the days of the Exodus. It was to remind the children of Israel what God had done for them. Because the Lord told Pharaoh in those days, Israel is my firstborn son. Exodus 4, verse 22. And yet Pharaoh was too proud to let Israel go. And because of Pharaoh's pride, and when he would not let the children of Israel go, the Lord said, well, then I'll take all of your firstborn sons. And in one night, the final plague, that's what he did, took the firstborn son of every family in Egypt. It was the one plague that got Pharaoh to change his mind and to let the people go. And the Lord's people on that night, they each sacrificed a lamb, and they put its blood on their doorposts. And so their firstborn was saved. And so the Lord told them, remember that night. Remember that every firstborn belongs to me. Remember that your firstborn were redeemed with a lamb. And from now on, for every firstborn, when he's 40 days old, you shall give a lamb to remember what I have done for you. Except in the baby book of Luke chapter 2, verse 23 and verse 24, it says, they offered a sacrifice according to what's said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves, 2 young pigeons. Mary and Joseph didn't have a lamb to offer. And so instead they offered the substitute sacrifice that was suggested in Leviticus chapter 12 for a family that didn't have the financial means to be able to afford a lamb for their firstborn son. They offered a couple of pigeons, a couple of turtle doves, which also suggests they probably didn't have all the other niceties that our firstborn children are likely to have in our day and age, even if they did exist in the first century. But these baby books aren't just filled with niceties. They're filled with announcements and things that were said about the children when they were born. This announcement right here, this one was posted on every door of the school where my wife taught middle school the day that our firstborn was born, because one of the other teachers went around the school and put this announcement all over the place. There's announcements like that in the baby book of Jesus too. There's an announcement, 2 announcements that take place on the very day of this offering of the sacrifice of the firstborn. There's the announcement from Simeon, an old man who was there in the temple, and an announcement from an 84-year-old woman named Anna. Neither one of these 2 knew Joseph or Mary before this, but by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, they had been told that this firstborn was something special. And so Simeon, a man who had been waiting for the consolation of Israel, is what Luke chapter 2 tells us. In other words, he had been waiting for the Lord to fulfill all of his promises to his people, saw the child come in with his mother and rushed over there and rejoiced over the child. Rejoiced over him in song, saying, Lord, now you can let your servant depart in peace, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, in glory for your people, Israel. It was sang over the infant Jesus, but it wasn't really a lullaby. Actually, I've sang that more over people at the other end of their spectrum of life. The latest was Anne, just a few weeks ago, 2 months maybe, in a hospice house, just over here a few blocks, with her whole family gathered around. Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of all peoples. And it wasn't very many hours later that the Lord actually answered that prayer, that very night, for Anne. And she departed in peace. I don't know how long it was before the Lord answered that prayer for Simeon. It doesn't tell us in our text for today, but we do know that he was ready. He was ready to depart in peace because he had seen the gift of the Lord's salvation in this child, recognizing that child is the Christ, the one who would bring about all the promises that God had made to his people, and through whom all of it would take place. And seeing that, he knew he could depart in peace. And the same is true for you and I. Once we recognize that this child is the gift to the world, that God has given it to be, that this is the Savior of the world, that this firstborn son is unique among all others, well, then we too are ready to depart this life in peace. It's because that child was not just the firstborn of Mary. That child was also the firstborn of God. See, the Lord had said, Exodus 4:22, Israel is my firstborn son. But Israel was only the firstborn son because from Israel would come this son, Jesus the Christ. And this was spoken early in that baby book too. Go back to chapter 1 when the angel announced it to Mary and said, he will be called the Son of the Most High. This one will be called the Son of God. And not only is he God's firstborn son, but he is also the Lamb through whom all the other firstborn in Israel would be redeemed. See, that lamb that they slaughtered to put on their doorposts was just a symbol reminding them of what was to come, that this one would be born, who would be the Lamb through whom would be redeemed every firstborn in Israel. But not only every firstborn in Israel, every firstborn in the world. See, he'd be a light for revelation to the Gentiles, Simeon said. And not just for the firstborn, but for every family on earth. Every child, every parent, every sibling, every grandparent would find salvation in him. That's what Simeon's song is about. And so Simeon went on to say more. He went up to Mary and Joseph and actually gave them a blessing. And then he said to Mary that this child was destined for the rising and falling of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed, and a sword will pierce your soul also, and the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. See, there would be opposition to this sign, just as there was to the signs in Moses' day. Just as Pharaoh was opposed to everything the Lord was doing among him, so people will be opposed to this one too. And it's the first indication of how this child will one day suffer. A sword will pierce your soul also, on account of him, is what was said to Mary. Indication that she will deal with the grief of losing her son when he's pierced. And the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. The thoughts of many hearts will be revealed when the proud reject and do not believe in this message, or when the humble receive it and recognize that this child, the Christ, is there for their salvation. He's the light for all people in the world. See, but Simeon wasn't the only one to say that. In the next episode in Jesus' baby book is Anna. Anna, a woman who had been there in the temple worshiping and praising God night and day, it says. And she came up at that moment and she began to speak about God to everyone who was waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem, because this child is the one who would bring it. This is the firstborn redeemer of all of God's people. There's one more entry in Luke's baby book. We find it at the end of our lesson from Luke chapter 2. It says, when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. That's it. Where are all the firsts? Where's the first tooth? The first word? Where's the first birthday? Jesus' baby book isn't filled with all of the things that we would put in our baby books. But it's filled with everything this world needs to know what child this is. Since this is our Carol Sing Sunday, and we haven't sung it yet, let's close this message today by singing together about what child this is. 370. We'll sing the first two verses. What child is this?